Hi 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez and you are listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by Eric Helms and Alberto Nunez as we discuss what it means to stay natural. We'll start this talk by getting into some basics that we haven't yet discussed on our podcast in terms of what it means to be a drug-free athlete in the sport of bodybuilding. We touch on banned substances, drug testing methods, and how people can avoid or mitigate any testing blunders by being cautious with their purchasing and consuming decisions. But once we get through all that, the bulk of the rest of the conversation is about why we personally chose to stay natural athletes. Like, what were our first impressions of natural bodybuilding and why did we decide to go this route? And what some of you might find surprising is that this was a tough decision for some of us, having even purchased or used pro hormones in the earlier years. As you'll quickly see and hear, this episode has a lot of opinions, preferences, and beliefs that we hold as 3DMJ. But I want to preface this with the disclaimer that we're not bashing the use of performance-enhancing drugs, nor do we preach that it's an incorrect or unethical route. We are simply recounting our own experiences and sharing some insight on how we have chosen to live our athletic careers as a team, and we hope you guys can appreciate that. So, as always, if you have any feedback or comments on this specific episode, you can leave them for us at 3dmusclejourney.com under podcast number 40. And here it is, guys, Staying Natural with Alberto Nunez and Eric Helms. So, when we're saying natty, for listeners for the rest of this episode, you want to define that for us? Because you're so smart.
Sure.
And you almost have a PhD, and that means you know everything.
I'm wearing the World Natural Bodybuilding Federation t-shirt today.
Okay.
Completely on accident.
And a cat. He's wearing a cat,
and I'm wearing a cat as well. Yeah, I think natural could mean anything, really. But I think for the purposes of our podcast, when we're talking about it, this means adhering to the banned substance list in both spirit and in specifics. So
how do we do that in spirit?
People,
I'm just kidding.
Well, I can tell you.
Please do. Please do.
But first, this for those listening who don't happen to be involved in natural bodybuilding, which is, why the hell are you listening to us? But glad you're here.
Yeah. Keep listening. Don't listen to him. He didn't know. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know.
No, I mean, we have whole shows talking about differences between, like, one-piece suits and female bodybuilding. I just find it interesting that you're listening if you're not a natural bodybuilding fan. Anyway, we should start over.
No, I like it. I think we should keep it.
Awesome.
But I'm just saying, when we talk about, like, coaching philosophy and shit like that, that has no boundaries, is all I'm saying.
Right. So we have banned substance lists that are similar but not the same between all organizations.
Right.
The majority of good natural organizations have specific, not just generic, banned substance lists that they took from WADA. I understand the desire to have a WADA-based one, but not all of it's relevant to bodybuilding. So anyway, they're similar, not all the same. Most of the differences are related to time drug-free. So that's a big weakness in a lot of sport in general, is they don't specify how long you need to have been drug-free. And so some people will try to get around this by being like, yeah, I'm drug-free on the day of the competition. Like
now, like not yesterday, but
correct.
Now.
Yeah. I don't pin until next week, so I'm fine. Yeah. So typically for any legit, like hardcore, has been banned for a long time, anabolic steroid that's illegal, you have a 7-year drug-free period in most organizations. And then sometimes they make allowances for legally obtained pro hormones or pro steroids or basically over-the-counter things that contain banned substances. And they normally base that, depending on the organization, either based on a 2-year amnesty rule, which is kind of the WNBF's way of doing it, or based on when it was found out to have that property. And then from that point on, it's 7 years banned. And that was, I think, the way the OCB, IFPA, back when they were the same organization or within the same collective, the way they did it. So, for example, you may have taken, pro hormones before you ever found out about natural bodybuilding and be completely eligible to compete in an organization that doesn't have that on their banned substance list. have to wait 7 years to compete in another, or have to wait 2 years to compete in another because it was over the counter. And that was actually the situation I found myself in back in like 2007. So
yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, so it's actually, you have to do your homework a little bit, take responsibility for your actions, and do the due diligence of contacting promoters and show heads.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by the spirit of the rules.
Yeah.
Like, if something is going to be banned eventually and you're taking it, I think you're kind of breaking the rules if you're doing it intentionally, of course.
Yeah. So for those listening, WADA, World Anti-Doping Agency, right? Agency?
Probably.
Definitely World Anti-Doping. We know that much. Agency Associate. I think it's agency.
Amalgamation.
Yeah, that one. And then beyond that, every natural bodybuilding federation, typically on their website, you can find their banned substance list if you're curious. And they are, I would say, like 70 to 80% similar across the board, but there are some things to look out for.
Yeah. They're similar enough so that many of the organizations will allow pros from other organizations to compete. Not that they don't then test them according to their own standards, but it's not just like, no, you can't compete here because you're on different drugs or something like that.
Yeah. So when you guys started out, Bert, did you know that there was a difference? Like, or was it just like bodybuilding, or did you know that there was was there even a different set of organizations for tested and non-tested athletes?
I started out such a long time ago, I don't fully recall where my perspective was, but I knew that steroids were quite popular in bodybuilding, and where I used to hang out, which before we had Instagram, YouTube, things like that, it was the bodybuilding.com message board forums. And I started out in the teen section there, and luckily for us, we had a few good natural teens up there. Lane Norton was actually one of them. Lane was 19, and he would post there, and he would do a relatively good job in keeping all of us up to date with what is happening in natural bodybuilding. So you would hear about Dave Gooden, Joe Klemczewski, Derek Charlie Boy was there as well, and as well as like Lane's own adventures in natural bodybuilding. So I think it was sold to me that you do have this other option fairly early on, but it was still very popular to go that route. It was very widely accepted. Like, kids would jump from the teenage message board forums once they were 18 to the steroid section of the bodybuilding.com message board forums, which they had back in the day. I don't know if they still do.
They don't.
They took that out? Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to get information on how to do my gear, and I couldn't.
Confirmed.
No, but actually, I have a slightly different perspective, because I think I've been in the game a little less long than Berto, so I kind of remember where I started.
Okay.
But I remember I only competed 2 years after I started lifting. So I had started lifting and I didn't know anything, and I didn't really know anything about steroids except what the average person in pop culture knows. So then very early I didn't really think about or know the difference between a physique that was enhanced or not, or organizations. And then when I first got involved in bodybuilding, I wasn't aware of natural bodybuilding. I just assumed that, or what I'd been educated on poorly, was that at a certain point all bodybuilders took steroids to get to the top level, which is probably not untrue if you're looking at, Mr. Olympia. But I didn't get exposed to natural bodybuilding until I also joined the bodybuilding.com forums, and I think it was also Wayne Norton who was posting that I saw, and then I was like, oh, competitive bodybuilding is an option for me, and I don't have to necessarily go that route. And that was around the time when I decided that was a route I wanted to go.
What years was this?
2005 or 6, in that range. Maybe, no, probably late. I think 2006. Yeah.
I recall 2006 for you, Eric.
Yes. Yeah.
So I didn't know that there was a difference till I started watching it on YouTube in 2012. Not that because first off, there was never when I saw female bodybuilding and it was that Iris lady, and I was like, we're not doing that. So maybe we'll do figure, and figure looks like attainable.
Iris lady.
I don't know her last name. She's just
Iris
giant.
Kyle.
Okay, I didn't know.
That Ronnie guy.
I'm just gonna wait till y'all are done laughing at me. Which may be all day, really. Okay. I just knew I didn't want to do that, but then figure always looked like, well, that's obviously possible. So I just kind of started doing that. It wasn't until like 2012. Because in Oklahoma at the time, too, there was like one show I knew of because Chris Voss was going to do it, and it was an NPC show. And I didn't know that there was other... I didn't even know there was other organizations. I didn't even know what an organization was. I just super blindly was like, I want to look like that. And I entered it. But... again, until I really got into it, I'd say 2014. It was like middle of my 2013 season when I saw natural female bodybuilders, and I was like, oh shit, and now I do want to do that. But I never had that intention before because I thought it was either steroids giant or you just didn't.
And Andrea, why were you opposed to steroids personally?
Because all those giant girls' faces look like men. And I always, even though I wasn't aware of like how they like all the different kinds and how there can be very subtle, like I didn't know all that. All I knew was that when I saw those girls, one, they sounded and looked a little unfeminine, which some people think figures unfeminine, but whatever. But I think what I did know, right, because I was getting a master's in ex-phys, I did know, I'm like, if you're that big and you decide you don't want to compete in this anymore, how do you get back to looking like a normal girl? Like you get fat? Like or do you just keep getting bigger till you die? Like, you know what I mean? Like I just thought like, what's the long term, like how do you undo it? It just seems
Actually,
like
it works
permanent.
out great. You lose all the muscle mass, but you keep all the masculinizing effects. So you get to be small with a deep voice and a strong jawline and a large clitoris. It's a pretty good deal.
Hey, well, depends who you ask. No, it seemed like it's just like not reversible in my brain. I didn't know anything about it. I just knew like once they go there, I'm like, how do you undo that? Like a dude, like if you're kind of look good in a t-shirt, still you're right. Like a girl, it's like if I weigh 200 pounds, like what do I do? So that's kind of how I always thought about it. But what about y'all, right? Because like I just said, as a dude, you know, I mean, there's 5 people I think I personally know in my head that used to, and now they don't, and they still look like big, jacked, older gentlemen. You know? So what would, with it not, like, ruining your perspective and clothes forever, why would you guys not do that as a male?
For me, it was knowing myself. I know that if I don't work hard on my own perspective in life, I trend towards extremes. And can take things too far. So I knew that it's funny. I think we all start with like bouncing around the spectrum of misconceptions about drug use. Like I started with, that's a thing. And then it was like, oh, that's terrible for you. It's like Coke. And not even knowing that testosterone and steroids were the same thing, like early on. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, once I get into bodybuilding, you know, you try to, you know, justify whatever you're considering. And not knowing that there was a natural route, I started to watch things like HBO Real Sports or all these different specials on how, like, you know, like John Romano from Muscular Development going, where are the bodies? Show me the bodies. Like, and you get this impression that steroids are completely safe and they do nothing and they'll give you acne and might make you bald and that's it. To then, you know, hearing about natural bodybuilding being a path and then thinking about it to now being a researcher, and I've actually read a bunch of articles on, you know, steroid use in bodybuilding. And of course, it's not cocaine, but you can't expect some study on, you know, 600 milligrams of testosterone to compare to someone who for 20 years has been stacking 15 different drugs, you know. Yeah. And there's an alarmingly high rate of deaths and and health complications in the IFBB pro bodybuilding side of it. So anyway, I've bounced all around, but health has never really been the reason for me. It's just that I didn't want to. Well, not directly, but I didn't want to let myself run wild with it. Like if I thought my training and my nutrition were totally dialed in and I was plateaued and couldn't improve and I was competing in untested sport, you know, what would I do? I'd probably up the dosage. And then how far do you take that as a competitive person, you know? I don't want to turn into like Dave Palumbo or something like that. So, but I think that's a piece of it. The other piece was that I didn't feel comfortable not just breaking the law, but because I don't really ethically think that is a I don't believe in the law of telling people that they can't take anabolics or any drugs for any reason. I don't think drugs should be illegal. But more importantly, I don't want to go to the same guy who's selling meth or coke or ecstasy and be like, so you got any steroids? He goes, yeah, do you want like you want some heroin with that? I'm like, no, I'm good. Just the steroids.
Just steroids,
like,
thanks. Yeah.
Like, I don't really, like that. That's not something I'm ever going to do. Meet in a back alley and do an illegal drug deal, or even, do it online or whatever the 2017 equivalent is. That's just not something I'm comfortable with. So.
Yeah. Another thing, too, that I didn't mention that's a big deal for me now would be that you actually don't ever know what you can do. Like, I can't, like, if I'm on a forever non-tested platform and, like, there's that option, then I don't know, like, if I'm on the stage with 10 girls, did I really get last, or they just, like, dosed better than me? Like, that always kind of, like, never being fair, because even if it was all, say, female bodybuilding in NPC, or I shouldn't keep saying that, in non-tested federations, like, if there is no way to make that equal, and since it is illegal, you can't, like, test how much they're on, of whatever they're on, like, so, I don't know, there's just no way to have it to be a level playing field, I guess. And I think that would forever irk me.
Isn't that just the same as not knowing if who's training or dieting more effectively, or?
No. And not in my brain, it's not.
Well, I mean, there's the financial barrier. You may just not be able to afford the drugs that the other people are on.
Well, that doesn't... I mean, yeah. But I would just... I don't know. You're not... You can be awarded for things that you didn't actually do, and that bothers me.
That's true of genetics, though.
Yeah. True. But you can do the best you can do with yourself. And let's be for real. If you go to a show with 100 people, a lot of them aren't doing things that are smarter or better than you or whatever. And, like, I get that. But there's a ceiling somewhere. Even if it's your own ceiling, there is at least a ceiling. And then there just, like, never is with the alternative.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me from a competitive perspective, but I am very interested in just seeing what is my peak genetic potential without drugs, which is more of just a personal interest. So if anyone does or doesn't agree, I just don't really care. But yeah, I think if I was to decide to go the steroid route, I would be a little annoyed because I never would really know what my max potential was as a natural. But I wouldn't feel like there was some extra level of unfairness in competition if someone was taking more, taking it better, or happened to respond better to it than I did, because it's kind of the same way as training or genetics or...
Well, yeah, I guess it's like if I'm not taking it, I'm not going to compete in those organizations is what I'm saying. Like if I was in there taking it with all them, that'd be one thing. But it's like if I decide not to take it, then I don't want to compete in those organizations because I'm like, I don't know who the fuck I'm competing against or what substance I'm competing against. That's, I don't mean like... if I took it, would I be taking it right? I mean, like, I know I don't want to, therefore I really don't ever want to compete in shows that aren't tested because I don't feel like I'm competing against people.
You heard it right here. If you're on drugs, you're not a person.
Yeah. It's okay. You said earlier that you don't mind, that you said F the law, so it's okay.
I think we should make those into Instagram squares. Eric Helms, fuck the law. Andrea Valdez, if you take drugs, you're no longer a human. Timmy, did you smoke weed on Friday? Goodbye, human race.
Actually, you're going to die tonight, so by Saturday, you won't be here. That's what's going to happen to
Well, you're dead, at least in Andrea's heart, regardless.
So, Bert, you want to incriminate yourself instead of us just continuing?
This has been great. My squares can look so good.
They always do. Let us have some. Come on.
Let me see. No, there was a point in time there where I would almost say like not pro natural bodybuilding. There just wasn't many physiques on that side that inspired me, that looked like the way I thought bodybuilding should look. And yeah, so I always thought that I'd compete in the NPC and just try my hardest there. And it wasn't until I was at one of those like janky ass supermarkets in 2003, and I remember picking up. I would go there purposely because they had the Natural Bodybuilding magazine. I never purchased it. I would just look at it and put it back. But this one I purchased.
Nice.
It had Siobhan Cunningham. He had just won his pro card, I think. He had just won his pro card. And I think prior to his physique, I would look at all these guys and I'm like, man, you guys just don't look like bodybuilders. I mean, Siobhan did. Siobhan looked like a straight bodybuilder. He looked like, if anything, like those golden era physiques, like from way back when. And I thought to myself, like, man, this is what I want to look like at some point. I don't know if I can, but I'd be very satisfied with this look. I think it's very, very complete. I'd still say even then I was still kind of like, but we'll see. Let's get to work and let's see where we end up. Because, I mean, this is one dude, and, you know, you can go to any, like, non-tested show in California, and they're usually pretty stacked and really impressive, and that's what I wanted to be a part of. And it wasn't until 2008 that I finally, I think, came to a more permanent decision as to what I'm going to do with my bodybuilding, and that's just stay natural. And a lot of that came from just having a really good season where, for the first time ever, I felt really in control of my body, and I was very grateful for what it could do naturally. And there was a point in time where, as I was getting into shape, it went from like all the untested bros at my gym being like, "Hey, you know, thumbs up, dude, you're doing really well," to like, "Holy crap, how are you doing this? Like, you've been basically like shredded for like 4 months. Like, I'm sure you're not like taking diuretics like to come in and like do legs, right?" You know, so they were like, how, right? And I was like, wow, you know, I think prior to that year, I thought I knew a little bit more than I actually did. I changed a few things, and a lot of them with the help of Lane Norton. So Lane Norton coached me through that season, and after making those changes to how I approached my diet, it just made me think about all the other like places where, you know, there's probably all these gaps that I'm not even fully aware of that should be addressed, and I can make a lot of progress by doing that still. And then also, I got last place in my first pro show, so 11 out of 11, and that made me realize that, like, that's what it was. They're just not as honest as me.
If anyone's better than you, it's probably because they're cheaters.
Oh God.
That's how it goes. That made me realize that I don't know as much as I thought I knew at some point, and then also that, dude, this natural bodybuilding thing, like, it gets pretty crazy at a certain point, and you should probably like try to address this and work on that. And then also just honestly just being very grateful about what I could do naturally. Like, I'm really proud of that. Like, really proud of that to this day. Like, the fact that I was able to get all this from like that 140-pound, like really, really real thin kid, and we're making it work. So I'm very content with what I've done, the improvements I've made, and hopefully all the things that, or just the challenge, the fact that the challenge is there, that I'm going to spend the rest of my competitive career trying to crack the code, if you will.
It's funny how I think we all, I say we, not like just us three, but a lot of people think that they cap out really early, like those early plateaus or those early times you're doing shit so wrong, and you're like, well, this is it, this is all I got, maybe steroids are the answer, and then like you learn how to do shit right, and now we're like so satisfied that this is nowhere near all we got.
Mm-hmm. It psychologically makes sense to me, because for you to admit that you don't know what the hell you're doing and that you don't have great genetics is hard for some people, you know? So they, or maybe sometimes it's a crutch that they do have poor genetics. And in reality, they would have to admit to themselves that they don't have the knowledge, the experience, or the dedication, or the patience, or the combination of those factors to get their physique to where it actually would cap out, which from what we've seen in natural bodybuilding probably occurs in your late 30s if you do everything right, and maybe even later, just depending on when you got in the game and all the individual factors. So when I see a 23 or 25-year-old who's hit his first intermediate plateau after 2 years of training, I know, okay, you want faster progress and you want to hop on gear and you want to justify why to do that. Fair enough, I understand the mentality, but you might regret it, you know?
Yeah.
Just don't lie to yourself, you know? If you're going to use roids at a young age, just be like, right, I'm not anywhere near my natural potential, but I want faster progress. Just admit it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to...
You know,
Go ahead.
it wasn't about that, like, ever, like, to me. Like, now that you say that, it was never about the faster progress. It was just about where I could compete and where it would honestly, like, feel like I don't want to play JV football, you know? Like, I wanted to play varsity. And, like,
It's more about where you end up.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that, man, these kids have that we don't, is, like, no one believes it, but there's a lot of, like, pretty well-known and established naturals out there who, I guess, give you a general idea of what the human body can do naturally. Like guys like Nsima, or even Matt Ogus. I think Matt Ogus is a great example in that he's always made some sort of progress, like, every single year. Like, there's not a year where he stalls back, and people can say what they want about Matt, but he's, like, one of the most consistent bodybuilders out there. And it's a very realistic peak at, this is how you grow when you're natural. Like, the rate at which he's been growing.
Yeah.
And he's so good about, blogging, keeping up with the details that went into that. It's not a road that everyone wants to take. Like, not a lot of people are okay with putting on a pound of muscle every year. Like, that's just not enough.
My favorite part about Matt is that in 2011, everyone was like, "Oh my God, he's so jacked. Oh my God, he's so big." And, like, now you look at him and you're like, "Fuck, that was only 5 years ago. How much bigger he is now." And I can speak as someone who's lived with him. He really does just, like, eat and train. That's all he does. He loves it. He is even more, I think, for as much as y'all give me shit for being OCD about my training, I think he's, for a bodybuilder, one of the more...
Speaking for a bodybuilder.
Well, because people... because now I go to CrossFit gyms, I'm not as crazy as I was as a bodybuilder. Like, in terms of, like, the crowds I'm in. Like, when I was the OC, when they're like, all right, she's taking care of too much shit. And, like, now it's like, oh, they don't think I'm that crazy. But, like, Matt is very particular too, is all I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You can't do much to, like, he doesn't mess around with his training as far as, he's picky with his gym. He's, not that everyone should do this, but he's very picky about certain days he goes to certain places. He is a dedicated young man to that. And it makes me so happy to see where he's come in 5 years, is all, like, as a physique, because he really does just do exactly everything he can, and that's it.
And I find that fun, like, personally.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's pretty cool, but a lot of people don't see it that way. They don't.
Which is fine. I also enjoy. It's kind of cool. Like, this sounds masochistic almost, but I had a recent spurt in my own growth, and figuring out what I had to do that, even though it took me 3 years of, like, kind of nailing this last massive plateau I've had, was kind of exciting. I mean, I'm sure other people are like, why is that exciting? If you'd figured that out 3 years ago, you would be even bigger now. And it's like, it's not the way it goes, you know. That's not the part of the journey I enjoy. I don't wish I could go back in time and have it all right at day one. Yeah. I enjoy the struggle, I guess.
Yeah, figuring out for yourself. This last year was a real big year for me too, and, you know, after doing it for 6-7 years or something. And Bert, how it keeps you away from actually competing when you have a good off season. Yeah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think somewhere in both of y'all's stories, there were, like, very narrow, very big moments to where it was like, we're doing this or we're not, in terms of anabolics. Right? I know Bert's even purchased. Yeah. Do you mind if we talk about that?
We can talk about that.
Go for it.
No, a lot of people swear I'm lying, and I'm like, dude, why would I create this story? Well, it's, like, pretty, like, hard to believe that I had it all and I didn't use it after I purchased it. But like that's
People act like they found out secret knowledge though. Like, yeah, he bought it all, then he sold it. It's like, bitch, you only know he bought it because he told you. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. And I remember it was just a total impulse buy. It was probably, I was struggling with my first real injury. I remember that. So I wasn't emotionally in a very good place. And I was slowly starting to come back to the gym. And I recall that that generation of pro hormones was about to be banned. And this didn't happen that often because I think in the past, like, this just wasn't really an issue, right? Designer steroids that you can get over the counter. So I'm like, shoot, I need to get these now. Like, I need to get these now before I can never get them again. They're gone forever. Obviously, it doesn't work that way. They just change a few things, and here's the next year's class, right? But I purchased them, and it was about $1,000 worth of pro hormones. And I mean, looking back now, like all the signs pointed like, don't buy this stuff. Because I remember like going on there was a lot of message board. I was on every message board forum, and one of them was, I think it was called Anabolic Review, which doesn't even exist anymore. And I was trying to look for logs of people who took this stuff and like what happened at the end. And like none of these logs were ever complete. Like no one ever like was like, dude, like, hey, put on 5 pounds of muscle, lost 10 pounds of fat. No, never happened. Purchased them anyways, and then upon receiving them, I think what threw me off was one of the containers just had a sticker on it. Like it was something that someone like printed out and they put some tape on it. And it was just like these little containers that you can get at like a craft store. And that was one of my supplements. And I'm like, man, that feels so bad. Like it doesn't feel right. And then it just made everything else that was in that box less appealing. And like finally seemed like actually like pretty risky. And yeah, I had a few good back and forth with myself, and I decided that, dude, there's a lot of things you don't necessarily like do right. Like I was still in that point in time with my training where if I got the right phone call, I wasn't going to the gym. You know, if I was like too deep into like some sort of video game, nah. If I was tired, no, thank you. You know. So yeah, I had a moment with myself, and I discussed this was my list of things that I do well. These are my things that I don't do well. And there's just too many things. They're just fundamentally wrong. So I ended up getting rid of my pro hormones. I ended up giving them to the gym that I was training at, which was a Gold's Gym for a 1-year membership. And I recall that about a month later,
it's such a ridiculous deal. I love it that you gave some dude at a gym $1,000 worth of pro hormones to get a membership.
They had a supplement shop, and I remember walking by there and I saw something that I purchased. I'm like, you can't have that. And he was like, well, there's like for 6 months they could still be on our shelves. And I'm like, this is perfect. I have stuff that I don't know what to do with. Do you want it? And I gave it to him, and he's like, dude, just come to the gym for a year on the house. And then a month later, they got bought out by Planet Fitness, and they did not honor my deal. So,
sorry, that's not funny.
but that was I was very relieved to sort that out then. And then I was looking back now, like there's not a lot of things in my life when I was like 21, 22 that I could look back and be like, dude, you did that like straight up right thing. But in that case, I'm like, wow, yeah, you did the right thing, dude. Congrats on being patient, which I didn't have much of, obviously, because, I mean, look at that purchase. I was definitely a little bit in a rush back then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Eric?
Yeah, it was more.
I kind of already covered it. I was also, like, I think 22, and unfortunately, I didn't know anything about natural bodybuilding at the time. I was just obsessed kid who wanted to put on muscle, and heard about pro hormones, and could still find some that were over the counter legally. It was after that 2004 big ban, so that was the era where they started just changing the chemical name, and each individual company was getting like a letter from the FDA once they figured out what was in it. So it was like you'd have to buy it while it was there, and like, you know, Bodybuilding.com would have a supplement that was there for like a month and go away. So anyway, but I was just a meathead really, and just young 11 years younger version of myself. And yeah, so I took a handful, like this many. No, I took a couple pro hormones in 2005 and 2006. And then once I found out about natural bodybuilding and decided that I wanted to compete, I was just like, oh, I want to stop. And you can't completely put the genie back in the bottle, which I found out when I contacted all the organizations. But it wasn't one thing. There's a big debate on natural bodybuilding about whether people should be lifetime drug free, and I think that'd be a mistake, just because there's so many people who, like myself, Roberto, who, were impatient in their young 20s and either did or didn't know about natural bodybuilding, and hadn't decided to commit to that. And if some impatient young kid who takes her hormones in his early 20s then can't decide to be drug free and compete for the rest of his life, I think that's it's not very inclusive. I don't think it makes sense physiologically. And I definitely don't think it makes sense ethically or psychologically.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciated, and I unlike Berto, while I probably do regret the fact that I did it. I mean, maybe it made me a better person now, but it is annoying just to have like somebody randomly on Facebook, like, I heard Eric Helms used to be on Gear, and it's like, God damn it. Like, you make it sound like I was like, like
just needle in his ass all day. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But so that's annoying, but, so maybe I don't regret it, because I think that's having to deal with that and just be honest with myself and with other people is probably a good thing. And I'm sure, actually, I know that there's a ton of people in the same boat in natural bodybuilding who, decided that whatever road they started, and some are like were full blown on illegal androgenics and were 100 and not 100, but 50, 60 pounds heavier, and decided, I still want to compete, but I don't want to do that anymore. And I think it's cool that they have a place for that.
Okay.
I'm almost there. I'm almost done.
Okay.
But so anyway, that's kind of my perspective on it. Like, that's the reason why we have 7-year drug free, and why certain things aren't banned, or you have an amnesty period. And so yeah, that was a little awkward for me. I remember it was especially hard for me. It had kind of been like a previous chapter of my life after I did my first couple shows, where I was like, okay, I can compete here, I can't compete here. And then when in 2011, there was an opportunity for all of us to get on the same stage. And it was the year that the Cap City became the Muscle Mayhem, and it was no longer INBF, but at the time came under IFPA. And they had banned one of the pro hormones I took like 8 months before I took it. So I had to be 7 years drug free from like 2006. So I was not eligible to compete, even though I'd already competed in that show when it was INBF under the 2-year ban. And I was pretty disappointed about that. And I think that I felt like I was mad at myself. Like, it was so short-sighted. Why did you do that? You didn't think about what you're putting in your body or the consequences. You're just impatient. And that was probably a good moment of, humility and a life lesson for me. But at the same time, it sucked, because I wanted to get on stage with these guys. But no, I think that's a good thing in many ways. Like, if honestly, if you don't have the maturity to wait 2 or 5 years to get on stage, then A, you probably didn't have the maturity to decide to take something that was a banned substance in the first place, and B, you probably don't have the maturity to really be competing in bodybuilding. Yeah. Because which we've talked about before on this podcast, it takes a toll. So no, I look back and I think it was probably a valuable thing, and I talk about it openly and always have, because I think it is useful to other people who are probably in the same boat. And I know there's a lot of people backstage at natural bodybuilding shows who aren't lifetime drug free, and there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion.
What about, and I'm sure that you've heard this, the fact that there could be some 20-year-old kids now, like, all right, when I get on stage when I'm 30, I want to be real jacked, so I'm going to try to do this for like 3 years, either pro hormones or whatever, anabolics. Like, couldn't you just be strategic about that? Because you can't undo it, right? Like, I would be scared that if I...
So hold on. So they have the impatience to want muscle now, but they have the patience to plan to get on stage in 10 years with the potential advantage.
There are people who, I want to look fucking great on the beach. I'm not getting as jacked as I want to now. So I'm going to start taking this shit. Okay, I'm 28 now, and I actually want to get on the stage. so maybe I slow down or stop taking it somewhere in between. Like, would you feel like all that's fair, right? Or let's say it's a 20, somebody takes it 20 to 25 or 26, 27, 28, and then he realizes by 40 he wants to get on stage. You can't undo all those years of extra help. You know what I mean?
I think we also make a lot of assumptions about what you keep.
Mm-hmm.
From what I've seen, there's a single study out there that shows that you have a greater number of satellite cells, or I can't remember, it might be satellite cells or actual fiber. Yeah. You have right. So you don't lose all that, which means it's easier to maintain a larger area of muscle mass based on myonuclear domain theory. If you want to Google that, go for it.
No, I'm good.
But no one has ever actually done, excuse me, a study where you compare lifetime versus prior drug users, where you have a pretty damn high confidence that similar training age, and a large enough sample to confirm similar genetic potential.
There's no way.
And then look at them 7 years afterwards. I think there would be a way, but no one's done it. Instead, we just go, at a molecular level, you have an advantage. Therefore, if you took pro hormones once, you're going to be Ronnie Coleman forever.
That is not.
And I don't think I'm providing a straw man, not representing your opinion. I'm just saying people take it too far. I'll use a really good example. Jeff, when he won the 2011, I want to say, IFPA International, the guy who took second to him was the Canadian IFBB national champion back in the day in the 90s, and had been drug-free for something like 10 plus years. Mm-hmm. And Jeff beat him pretty soundly, in my opinion. Obviously, he's a good competitor now, but he competes in the IFBA. He decided he didn't want to do that anymore, I think for health and ethical reasons, and good on him. So, and also we don't think about other things. Like, if you just look at one mechanism, you often forget the big piece of the puzzle. Like, most guys have been on gear for 10, 20, 30 years. They end up being on HRT because there tends to be sometimes permanent effects on their HBT axis. They don't necessarily produce as much natural testosterone after being on exogenous testosterone for years at extremely high level.
Yeah.
So that means that could be seen as a disadvantage. So if you look at just that alone, then, if you want to compete naturally, you should be bigger being natural your whole life. But if you look at it the other way, then... So I don't know where that sweet spot is of where the supposed advantage is, but I do know when you see someone go off the sauce after a long time, they lose substantial size if they were far above their natural limit.
Yeah.
Maybe it is true that they fall right back down to their genetic max, and they are at an advantage. But I think that would be dose dependent, time dependent, how smart they were about it, things like that. Did they cycle on and off? What did they take, etc. How shut down were they from their own drugs? So I don't think there's anything wrong with a 7-year drug-free rule across the board.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything's wrong or right. I'm just saying that I would think that there would be some 20-year-olds out there being like, oh shit, only 7 years? All right, well, I don't know.
Or they assume that someone who looks really good in their 30s, like when you backtrack, if they did something funny in their early 20s, that's why they look that way. Yeah. That is something you will hear often.
Actually, that you hear more often. Not people planning to do it, but they assume other people did it. Like, yeah.
Lifetime
that guy looks great, but lifetime, I don't think so. Which there's the assumption that something they did in their past is having a huge effect on them now. Yeah. I mean, hell, my stage weight in 2007, only a year after I stopped taking pro hormones, was 178, and I was like 8% body fat. And I've competed now in the mid 180s at like 5% body fat. So my drugs are giving me like this very delayed effect, So.
Did you feel any different? Did you see anything different? Or is it so hard to equate because you just were such a young, so early in your training age anyways, that you would have gotten better anyways?
I mean, we're literally talking about 3 to 4 week periods.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's how long, like people think of the gear, which you inject for like 12 to 16 weeks or 8 to 16 weeks. Like the pro hormone bottles you buy, it's exorbitantly expensive things, and take a pill a day for 30 days. And and I mean, it was tough because I was still getting newbie gains at that time. I really don't know why I did this. It was really impatient. But I think it's hard to be objective and look back. I mean, certainly my training went well during those periods, but I think if you had like erased my mind with a magic, Men in Black pen, and every time I took a pill right afterwards, so that I trained for 3 or 4 week periods for the couple times I did it, and didn't know that I was taking it, I wouldn't be like, oh my God, what's happening? I would just be like, it's a good 4 weeks, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people think drugs are magic. Like, honestly, if you think like a 4 week period you can put on 20 pounds of lean body mass, then why isn't Ronnie Coleman the size of a state? You know, like.
Well, it's all relative, though.
Yeah.
Like, to some people, the results that they do give would be pretty fucking magical.
Well, sure. I'm not saying drugs
Yeah.
don't make a difference. Obviously, they do. I mean, like, if you look at a guy my height in the IFBB who has his pro card, he's 80 pounds heavier than me.
Yeah.
So, but that's a far cry. That's 15 years of training hardcore, taking all the drugs, versus you know, a 3 week period of buying something over the counter, which may or may not even have in it what it's supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So, for all I know, I might be drug free. You know, to be honest. Like, that shit was pretty shadily sold, you know, and marketed, and a lot of those companies got shut down, you know.
Yeah.
So
he had sugar pills for like 3 or 4 times, and that
and
proprietary blend. Damn it.
Yeah, and there's actually studies showing if you think you're taking steroids, you get really amazing gains compared to not, even if you're taking placebo. So now, to be fair, I'm not saying I don't think I didn't take it. I willingly tried to and bought pro hormones. And like
so
I said,
in spirit, you took it.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I probably did in reality too. I doubt like three different pro hormones that I took over 2 years. Each time was just sugar. You know, so.
What do we think about that witch hunt though? Like the whole like how Bert's on everything because
Bert is just on the cutting drugs, and he apparently he takes diuretics just for random Instagram photos. You didn't know this? It's amazing his kidneys haven't shut down.
Someone needs that dude needs a hug because he wants to be acknowledged in a positive way.
We're not going to bring him up here, but I mean, yeah, I'm sure, Bert, you've gotten your fair share of this for years and years. I don't know. How does that feel to be accused of shit all the time? You're a pretty sound dude, so I'm sure not as bad as it would affect someone who cared more, but
I think the strange part is that over the years, as I've gotten better at this slowly, when I look at like my bodybuilding life relative to what I thought I had to do a decade ago, it's like it's so simple. Like if people saw me diet, like if they could see me diet through a show and see what goes into that, they're like, fuck, there's nothing like really crazy or out of the ordinary, and he doesn't like go to his dresser when like his girlfriend's not looking and like throw the pills in there. Like there's none of that. So I find it very humorous because I'm not taking anything, and for someone to say it like there's no doubt in my mind that you take things during certain times of the year. That's just a little weird, and I can't even. I don't know how someone gets there, to be honest. So I don't. It doesn't do anything to me. I think the closest the part of me that it does touch is when someone's calling you, I guess, a liar, that you're like straight up lying about this, that you're going out of your way to like not be honest, and like that so much of your life is a lie. When I stop and think about that, that's a little, I wouldn't say disheartening, but it's like, man, how does like that person get to that point where they feel that way, where they accuse others of such things with no real evidence? So it doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me at all. What I do dislike is that whenever I do try to promote the sport and like, dude, check out this athlete. This athlete's like really awesome. Like, look what some natural bodybuilders can do. They rain on my parade. That's like the first thing that comes to mind is like they instead of like us sitting here like marveling at what some people can do, we're here like throwing rocks at this person. Chances are I'm betting that they're not doing anything like that's against the rules or wrong. They probably live a life that's a little simpler than that person might assume as well. So that's where my beef with it stands. It's like sometimes it's very hard to showcase what you can do without drugs because that's where people run to.
Yeah.
I don't mind skepticism. What bothers me is when people are definitive about it and act like they have secret knowledge and that everyone's been lied to. They approach it like a conspiracy, you know?
Yeah.
I think that bothers me as a scientist, but it also bothers me as someone who's a part of 3D Muscle Journey trying to promote this is a viable option and a pathway and something healthy to do. Like if I get much more bothered, I've had the rare accusation because I'm not a genetic freak who looks like he's on gear even when I'm in peak condition. But the rare accusations I get don't bother me very much because I just think it just seems strange. But what bothers me is when Jeff or Berto or someone I work with or gets accused, because that says that they think 3D Muscle Journey is a lie, and they think I'm a naive idiot, that I would, partner with people and spend time living with them, like in Berto's case, and spend the holidays with them and invest my entire future in them and be completely oblivious to the fact that they are a sociopath, which is really what they're saying. If they're willing to create, 3D Muscle Journey and promote all this content and talk about being lifetime natural and, compete and pass polygraphs, it's like that is quite the claim. And maybe they don't even realize it. Maybe it just comes from a place of, insecurity and frustration, which it probably does. But anyway, yeah, it bothers me. I think the one time it bothered me the most, I got an email from someone I'd Skyped with who I'd, given my best shot at trying to give them helpful advice. And they were a relatively impatient person. And, like when I suggested, hey, I want you to track for 2 weeks and then let me know what your macros were so I can give you macros. They're like, 2 weeks? I'm like, okay, we need to work on your patience. Anyway, we finished that. I did my best I could to help the person. I gave them, real advice. Like, you're going to have to put in some time if you want to figure out how to do this and figure out what works best for you. Something like 3 or 4 months later, I get an email from this person and they accused me of providing Matt Ogus drugs and that I held back on the information in the Skype consultation. I didn't give them the real advice. And then said, okay, now will you please give me the real advice? What do I need to take? I know that to look like a fitness model, you have to take drugs. And once I realized, and this was a while ago, once I realized that someone thought you couldn't be 5'6", 155 on stage, I was like, okay, we have a problem. You can't even, I mean, like we said, Matt Ogus is a very impressive bodybuilder, but I just don't, like, when I think of everyone out there who might be who we should be skeptical about, he's not on the list,
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, it just, so it was just really strange to me that someone would look at a physique like that and think that was unachievable. And it made me think that's not a good message. If a lot of people buy that, then they're going to think to get any kind of, success in fitness or bodybuilding, they have to be on drugs. And that was actually what motivated me to write article for the AARR, Alan Aragon's research review, about this specifically. And what do we know? What have drug-free bodybuilders accomplished? Like when I say drug-free, I mean people we know but beyond a shadow of a doubt. I actually made a YouTube video, which maybe we should link for this podcast, of just
45 minutes?
pictures.
Hour long?
No, that's the natural bodybuilding controversy. I made a very short one about where I just gave stats on Olympic lifters and strongmen from before anabolic steroids existed, and I had pictures from guys from the 1930s and earlier. And just what their physiques look like in peak condition. And I guarantee you, like some of these dudes from like 1920, like Ernest Cadine or some of these guys, people would be like, there's no way he's not on gear. I'm like, dude, that was 1890. He wasn't on gear. All right. We didn't even know what testosterone was. All right. So yeah, that was, I think I had a couple of years of producing content about that. I wrote the article for the AARR. I made that video. I made the natural bodybuilding controversy video, the other one you talked about, where I was just like, people are so unreasonable, and people are being dragged through the mud with no evidence. And people who I know and who I'd bet money on being natural, and just let's say maybe they, like, we don't know if they are or aren't, and people are willing to, cause personal harm to someone and basically do the equivalent of like mass cyberbullying, and harm their business, their reputations, and their psychological health on just the supposition. And I just think that's a very, very dangerous thing. So yeah, I started to provide some what I tried to do, provide a rationality in that discussion, because it was really bothering me in the I'd say my 2012, 2013 period.
You mentioned people passing polygraphs. For those unaware, I'd say like when we say natural bodybuilding, right, anyone who hasn't actually been in shows doesn't understand that the way we do get tested 90% of the time is through a lie detector test, a polygraph, right? And I think because that is the most of the time, then people will throw out the like, well, anyone can lie. I mean, like, well, I guess that's true. But we do get, and especially the pros, right? Urine tests, at least the top, however many, sometimes across the board. So like when we say we know someone is or isn't, there is a chance that people could be fudging polys, right?
Oh yeah, let's be clear.
Yeah.
There's actually a really good paper on this that came out where they interviewed a bunch of people, and among them bodybuilders who admitted to cheating but who had not been caught in multiple sports. And the main motivation among the bodybuilders was because they thought everyone else was cheating. They didn't, and some of them even expressed guilt about doing it, but did it. So like there's a huge amount of cognitive dissonance there. You wouldn't feel guilty if you truly thought everyone else was doing it, but nonetheless, their motivations were that they thought they had to do it and that natural bodybuilding was a joke. And this was a survey of Australian bodybuilders, and not to throw any kind of dirt that way, but in Australia, there's not as many options, and one of the more well-known organizations has had entire years where they did not test. So it is more natural bodybuilding in name rather than purpose. So I think while the polygraph and a urine test, they are definitely beatable. You know, if someone, really worked hard enough and figured out a consistent way to do it. I don't think someone who's passed like 30 polygraphs over years is likely to be failing, or is likely to not fail some and have an issue with that. But if someone has a long track record in natural bodybuilding, I think there are pretty overwhelming odds they're probably drug-free. It's probably easier to pass a urine test, and some organizations only urine test. But the value of having, like it's very rare for INBA, PNBA to do polygraphs. They do it occasionally, but it's pretty rare.
But it's only the top placings usually.
Typically, it's random or who won.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, though the value of a polygraph is that it makes a statement. And I think an organization that is very loud and proud about being natural, not necessarily judgmental, and very clear about it, and states this is a drug-free show, everyone will be polygraphed, and winners will be urine tested. And you're going to have a harder time if you're the mindset of someone who wants to cheat, of convincing yourself that you're competing against other people on drugs. Because that's the primary way that I think people convince themselves to do it, is they think everyone's on drugs. Yeah. And that's the big debate out there.
Same with online. Cycling, same with
100%.
Yeah.
And now in other sports, there's a little more pressure because there's not a drug-free arm of it. Yeah. There's no natural cycling. And often you're not just representing yourself, you're representing a team and a country. And there's huge issues that they've had in certain countries and in certain sports where there's pressure from other teammates, pressure from coaches, or even pressures from the actual sporting body. And there's actually institutionalized cheating. This has happened in some countries in certain years in certain sports. So we have the unique benefit in bodybuilding and powerlifting of having drug-free and non-drug-free competitions. And I would actually say that if you took your random IOC drug-tested Olympic sport and compared it to, say, like WNBF, there'd be less cheaters in bodybuilding, despite what the internet says. Yeah. Because the vast majority of people who want to use gear would just do it where they were allowed to do it, than compared to the sports where there's not an option. And I think it's much more understandable how someone gets caught up in feeling like they have to take drugs in a sport where there's not an option to do so, or at least there's not a federation to do so, and where you're getting outside pressure. But if the main driver in bodybuilding is your own perception of others cheating, that just means we need to give the impression and the serious, true integrity position of, we want this to be natural. Of course you can beat the tests, but don't just go compete in the untested one. This isn't a fake natty organization, So,
I think the only other thing I have, and it's just me poking out like all the things that I've heard, I guess, regarding this whole topic, would be the guys that either truly or falsely swear by the fact that they need it for medicinal reasons.
Actually, there's a good Facebook conversation about this. I think one of the organization heads was asking about this, and there are, I want to say, is it ANBF? Is that the one that allows they allow HRT?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think if it was anything besides hormones, I'd be fine with that. Like, if you're a type 1 diabetic and you have to take insulin, fantastic. You know, in the kind of physiological doses to keep yourself healthy, that probably shouldn't have an advantage. If you have to be on a beta blocker for some reason, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The problem, though, is that we have some well-documented evidence that your testosterone levels will go from normal to damn near castrate in some individuals throughout the course of dieting. And if you want a surefire way of getting prescribed HRT, just go get your testosterone levels checked way deep into your diet, and you can probably get endocrinologists to prescribe you HRT because that's what your natural hormone levels do. So, unfortunately, someone who is prescribed HRT for even legitimate reasons, like they have low test and it's affecting their health and well-being, they won't have that drop because they're taking exogenous levels. So, I mean, I don't think it's appropriate for natural bodybuilding. I do think that sucks if you're in the position of being on HRT. And I don't want people to think that we are against people taking HRT, but I think by no one's fault, it does provide an advantage to those people who are going to have a potentially 2/3 drop in their testosterone levels, like we saw in the case study that's pretty famous of the 6-month prep. If you go from damn near 1,000 to 250 or 300, that's surely going to have an effect on your performance. And if someone else just stays at 1,000, I don't think that's fair. So
even if they took it even in the off season medicinally. Well, and
if they stayed flat 1,000 off, or let's even say 500. If they were 500 year round, but someone else is 600 and drops to 200, that's I think that provides an unfair advantage.
Yeah, I just remember I know that there's been multiple comments that I've seen where someone's upset that they take testosterone because they naturally have needed it for years, and they're not allowed to compete in natty organizations.
I think it's unfortunate, but I don't necessarily think that I don't think it's wrong necessarily that the organizations have decided to do that. And I do think people would be justifiably annoyed if someone was allowed to come in on HRT, because that's also easily abused.
Yeah. You could easily just double your dose. No big.
Well, if you have a script,
you could,
and you can walk around it. What's the absolute highest normal I can be? And then what are we going to do? Hormone testing throughout your whole prep to make sure you don't go above that.
Yeah.
So there's a whole can of worms that I don't think should be used.
And percentage-wise, it's so rare.
Yes, it is rare. But not that we should just not cater to minorities. I think.
Well, yeah, but it's just like again, you can't. Try to cater to minorities, but not. You can't please everybody in every situation. You're unfortunately at some point. Yeah. And this is going to sound very like New Age Republican of me. Like your feelings at a certain point don't matter with physiological reality. Yeah.
I think it is totally unfair if you were born without the ability to produce testosterone and you love bodybuilding and you want to compete. I fully support you, but you can't compete in drug-tested natural bodybuilding, regardless of the fact that that's just unfair.
Yeah.
So I can't dunk a basketball, and I won't be able to because I'm
me neither.
Not 6'8". So
yeah. Neither can Bert.
Not that there aren't 6-foot guys who can dunk basketballs, but I'm not Moti Burks.
Bert, do you agree with that, or do you have any further thoughts on that as far as I guess
Eric went too long with that one. What was the question?
Well, partial natties in general, like either someone who took it back in the day and now they don't, or someone who needs HRT because doctor said and now they can't compete in natty organizations, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Partial natties, I like it. The real half natties.
I think a lot of the people in that thread on Facebook, that one discussion that took place, that were like clearly like, nah, this is not going to work. There's going to be a clear advantage for the person who is using HRT. I don't think a lot of them were even like well versed with in regards to like what actual data we have out there. They just know that when you compete, your body goes through some wear and tear. It's just part of your season, and it's something that you kind of know as you go into it that this is going to happen at a certain point. And I think the fairest comparison I can think of is kind of like playing like tackle football, but you have everyone without a helmet, but that dude gets a helmet. It's just like he can play the game a bit more freely than I can, you know, in some aspects, not in all aspects, but he's going to be a little bit less susceptible to that long season, to that wear and tear, and simply because of that, it's like no, you sign up for this. Surely some people just genetically are going to take less of a hit than others, but we all do to a certain extent. That is actually something that I would love to at some point do, is just kind of go around and like survey a lot of the natural bodybuilders in regards to how are they feeling when it comes to many different aspects of their life. I'm pretty sure it'd be kind of like, man, it'd be like borderline depressing. What comes with those like high level aesthetics, right? But yeah, no, I'm totally against it. I don't think there's many other places you can't compete in if that is truly what you want to do.
Yeah. And I think a good way to kind of end this or wrap it up would be the fact that, just a disclaimer out there, none of us, we didn't choose that route, but we're not necessarily against it. We're just maybe against if you decide to not be truthful about it, but there's a place for everybody.
Yeah.
I would say Berto, myself, and you have a ton more in common with someone who is using anabolic steroids and competing in bodybuilding than we have in different. Yeah, like Andrea said, the only time I ever have an issue, because I don't have an ethical issue with it.
No.
I don't have a medical issue with it because of the ethical thing. That's your choice. I'm not going to sit here and tell you what you should or shouldn't put in your body. I only have an issue if someone is trying to gain a competitive advantage and competing in a natural show and trying to get away with it by using steroids.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm pro bodybuilding, and I happen to be a natural, and that's what the community that I like and makes sense for me. And I think that's always been 3DMJ's stance, is that we're pro natural, not anti drugs. So
Yeah. Word. We'll close it on that one. Thanks for chatting, dudes. See you next week. Bye.